Hey there, I'm Mark. I'm one of the pastors at the downtown campus. Just want to welcome you today, and I hope you'll enjoy this teaching from God's Word.
Yeah, you guys can sit. I don't know. How long will you stand with me? That's the question. I have to stand up here. You should have to stand up here. When Mark gave me this passage, I got excited because there's certain things that this passage reminds me of. And if you have kids, I have two, they can say some crazy things. And this passage reminds me of a crazy thing my daughter said. I did get her permission that I can say this story, but she was 4 years old. We were at the Boys and Girls Club, sitting in the bleachers, watching what they consider to be basketball for first graders. Not really sure that was really what was going on. My son was trying to run up and down the court. That's about it. But here's my daughter sitting behind us, and she turns with the most sincere look on her face and very great words that she had and said, "I want some wine." I'm sure that she could see the puzzled look on my wife and I's face, and she clarified, the drink? So here's my 4-year-old daughter wondering, she wants wine, the drink, and we're going, what in the world is going on? Well, come to find out that the great River Valley Child Care Center, both my kids went there, and they were teaching through the miracles of Jesus. So Miss Mary was her teacher, and she taught about Jesus turning the water into wine. So I'm guessing how my daughter's mind worked. She said, well, I love Jesus. Jesus turns water into wine. Therefore, I love wine. It kind of makes a natural progression. But I will always remember that little sincere voice of my 4-year-old daughter saying, I want some wine. The drink? So would we kind of come today as we look at this passage with fresh eyes? Maybe not the same eyes that my daughter had at 4, but that we would look at what does it look like as we open up this sign of wine? So the sign purpose, right? We know that the signs have a purpose. And we know that this is Jesus' first sign. We see there verse 11. It says this is the first of the signs. Now, the 4 Gospels that record the life of Jesus, they all take a different take on different parts of his life. And John kind of sits by itself over here, is a little bit different always. And he goes, hey, this is the sign that I'm going to record. It's his first miracle, first sign, and John records it. So let's pay attention to what he's going to teach us through it today. I think we would all agree that signs are important. Right? Signs, whether they're street signs, business signs, warning signs, we need signs in our life. Think about the last time you were in a city that you were unfamiliar with. I took a trip to Texas. I wanted to make sure I knew where I was. So you look at the signs, especially when you're going on interchanges and exits, and where do I need to turn to get to my final destination? Or maybe just in an airport, right? You're in an airport, you want to know where's gate 34? Where is that going to be? How do I find that? Where's baggage? Where does the ground transportation so I can get out of the airport? Or even if you're in the mall, hey, I want to get to this store, so I need to know where the sign is for that specific business. Signs are great, but because signs usually direct us to the destination. Right? We can see a sign being labeled to help us get from point A to point B. Different kinds of signs are out there, right? There's identification signs. Maybe they point out landmarks. Maybe they serve as a "you are here," one kind of sign. Directional signs, like I kind of showed, they point us in a certain direction. Junctions, interchanges, off-ramps, all those things are directional signs. There's informational signs. Maybe they don't help us about getting to the destination, but they supplement information along the way. Hey, there's going to be construction, or there's going to be congestion, those kind of things that are informational. Then there's the regulatory signs, those things that are regulations or requirements, ones that we really like speed limits, no parking, those kind of regulatory signs. So in these, when we see signs, we have a few responses that we can make for the signs. First one, we can miss the signs. I'm sure you've never done that. I remember being in our student ministry on a trip to the inner city of Fresno, and I've got a van load of high school students, and I missed the one-way street sign. As I'm driving down the road and realize that all the cars on this way, the side of the street, are parked facing me, and all the cars on this side of the street are facing me, I'm going the wrong way. Got off, we all survived, it was great. So we can miss signs. We can also ignore signs. I'm sure none of you have ever ignored those signs on the side of the road with the big numbers on them. You know, they may tell you how fast you're supposed to go, and you kind of ignore them and go your own speed. Maybe you've ignored stop signs or blown through a red light. I heard the story when I was studying that Chicago, one of the suburbs of Chicago, had a problem with its residents stopping completely at stop signs. So the mayor in 2007 decided, hey, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to add a little bit to the signs. I'm going to put a second, smaller octagon, and on those smaller octagons, I'm going to have a little bit of extra help, like stop or I'm telling your mom. Stop in the name of love. Stop, freeze. And yes, as they were humorous, they were enjoyed, and they worked. People actually completely stopped at this. Now, yes, people laughed. Everybody laughed except for the Illinois Department of Transportation. They said it was unlawful for this to be on a stop sign, so they made them remove them. So bad, too sad for the people of this Chicago suburb. So we can miss signs, we can ignore signs, but we can also follow signs. Right? Following signs gets us to the right place. It shows us where we are and keeps us safe along the way. Last week, Mark began kind of showed us about this idea of following, right? Of following the right signs of the right people. He talked about calling these first 5 disciples. And that as we would hear that same call in our life, would we take those next steps, wherever those next steps are? So today we're going to look at this first sign. And maybe not miss it, maybe not ignore it, but let us follow it. But here's the thing, the destination is not the sign itself. We don't go to look at the sign like, man, that is a great signpost. So true, so square, really rustic. We don't say, man, look at how good the sign sits on it. We're not really looking as the sign as a destination, and sometimes that can be the case. We can get distracted along the way, and we look at the wrong things. So we need to know that there's a sign purpose, right? What is the purpose of the signs? And I love it at the end of the book in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, it says this: Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So these signs are pointing to Jesus, that we would believe in him and that we would have life. So may that be our focus today, that we would look at this sign with that purpose. So we find the setting of the story. We find Jesus at a wedding, right? It says on the 3rd day the wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and the disciples and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to this wedding. So they're invited to a wedding, and I picture Jesus as the kind of person who would really like weddings. He seems to always find himself in gatherings of lots of people, in crowds. Yes, he does take himself and he goes away and he goes to lonely places and he prays and he talks to God, but then he finds himself back in the midst of the crowds, in the midst of the party, in the midst of festivals, in the midst of the celebrations. And that's awesome, because I think he'd be the kind of person who would love to go to a church potluck. Like, right, he would show up, he'd be in the midst of it. He'd be here after church when we're having pizza, so hopefully you're going to come and have pizza with us after church. But so he's at this party, he's at this wedding celebration, and we need to understand that a wedding in Jewish culture, in this culture, would have been a little bit different looking than in our culture today. Now, we still think weddings are important. We really, hold them at a high standard. I think everywhere probably thinks weddings are important, but we need to understand that I've been to long weddings. They're not the greatest. They kind of seem to drag and drag, but this would have been a really long wedding. Some say that the weddings can last up to a week or more. Right? And it would start off actually before the wedding that the father of the bride would walk her through the streets. People would congratulate the bride and they would make their way and they would end at the groom's home. The ceremony would actually usually take place on the steps of the groom's house. Now, one thing that's really different than it is today is that the center of the wedding in this place is the groom. The groom was the focus, the attention. Now, I'm going to say I'm glad we've changed that. I really like it that it's all like today it's all about the bride, right? It's her special day. She wears the white dress, way better looking than any of the grooms that have ever been there. And I can do I can smile and be in the corner for long enough for a wedding. But to this point, it's all about the groom. The groom is the focus. The groom is where they have the ceremony. And it wasn't a short ceremony. It was a long time coming. And then after the ceremony, then the bride and the groom, the wedding party, would make their way back through the town. And they would take the longest route possible so that everyone could celebrate with them. They would dress up. They would wear crowns. They wanted people to see them and party with them. And then after the wedding, it was not like, hey, we're leaving, we're going on our honeymoon, we're out of here. They would stay. They would have an open house, and this open house would continue the celebration. So we see that this party would have lasted a long time, and it was a big deal. Well, I went to a couple weddings this summer, and I'll remember them. One, I'll remember them because they were both triple digits, super hot, little to no shade whatsoever. So sweating like crazy, but it didn't matter. Why? Because we were celebrating the couple. We were standing with the couple. I wanted to encourage them. I wanted to say, hey, we are here as a person with you in your marriage to come. And you wanted everything to come off without any problems, no incidents in the wedding. I think as the weddings that I've done, I'm always kind of worried when it comes to the actual day of the wedding. What's going to take place? Hopefully everything goes smoothly. Like there's always that fear that somebody's going to faint in the midst of the ceremony. Like one of those groomsmen lock their knees, it's hot, and all of a sudden they're down. It takes kind of the focus off the wedding itself. I don't know who came up with the tradition to give the most expensive part of the wedding, the rings, to a little boy and have them walk down the aisle. I'm always like, give them fake rings. They don't need the real ones. They might lose it. Thinking a little kid runs off and takes the rings with them. Or maybe worse, someone just doesn't have the rings to begin with, loses them, forgets them, whatever. In Southern Oregon, we always wonder, what's the weather going to be like when it comes to a wedding? Is it going to rain? Is it going to be triple digits? We always have the season also of smoke, so it's never fun to have smoke at your wedding. But I think for me, the biggest thing I'm always worried about is saying the wrong names, especially if it's like a second marriage and you're like, all right, make sure you don't say the wrong name. Don't say the ex-wife. Don't say the ex. Like that's big for me. So I make sure my notes have the names really, really big everywhere I can, highlighted, bold, whatever. Or just saying the wrong thing in the ceremony. Maybe something like what God has separated. What God has joined. That one may have been an actual mistake I made. Luckily, they're still together, so God did keep them together. But those are faux pas for our weddings today, and we're going to see that there was a rather large faux pas at this wedding that Jesus is invited to. And that faux pas was that they ran out of wine, right? It says that when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. It would have been terribly embarrassing for that groom's family because they were in charge of all the refreshments, in charge of all the preparations. And it would be the idea like if you had a party at your house and you had it all set up and then you realized that the bathrooms didn't work or the water was shut off or there was no heat or air conditioning. Like those things would make shame upon you. And this was a shame culture. So to run out of wine would be huge embarrassment. Actually, it would also not only just be an embarrassment, there'd be some financial consequences to running out of wine. Gifts would be taken back. There could be lawsuits if you didn't provide a good enough party. So we need to make sure we don't mess up the wine celebration, and the wedding celebration, and that's what happens. So this is a major problem, running out of wine. And so Mary, the mother of Jesus, seeks him out, and we don't know why. We don't know why she goes, hey, Jesus, you take care of this. Now, we don't know that he's probably not done any miracles yet. He hasn't done anything that would show that, hey, I got this. Maybe she just knew that he could because he was the Son of God. And it could also be that he was the oldest son. Hey, you're my oldest son. You help with this issue. You help cause a solution. But whatever the reason, Jesus gets called upon, and we see his response. Verse 4, woman, why do you involve me? Jesus replied, my hour has not yet come. I don't know how the inflection of the word woman was. I picture that, I see it, and it reminds me of being a high school student and the way that I would talk to my mom. Not always appropriate, not always nice, open mouth, insert foot. I'm not being very respectful. I'm doing the things that sometimes young men do. But that's not the case. Even though it sounds rude, it sounds disrespectful, that would have not been what this word woman came across. It's actually, Jesus used the same phrasing, the same word, woman, when he's on the cross. As he's on the cross and he looks down to Mary and he says, woman, I want you to be taken care of from John from this point forward. So it wasn't a term that was disrespectful. It was kind of the idea that we would see as ma'am today. But no matter how he talks, he asks, why do you involve me? What am I doing here? And it brings up this idea that he responds with, my hour has not yet come. See, he's reminding her right now that he has a divine timeline. That yes, God has given him a purpose, God has given him a mission, but it's not time for that yet. And it is that yet. He's going to use this phrase, my hour, or something with time, about 8 times in the Gospel of John. In John 7, in John 8, in John 12, in John 13, in John 17. He's going to keep bringing up that there is a divine time for me to do my work, and it's not yet that time. But Mary doesn't just listen to that. She has her comment, well, tell the servants, do whatever he says. She still wants him to do something. Now, we know that he can, or she knows that he can, and so he didn't have to respond, but he does. And that's where we see this miracle. We see the sign. We see what he does, and that happens in John 2, verses 6. And he takes these 6 ceremonial washing pots, and he tells the servants, hey, fill them to the brim. And then he says, hey, take a scoop and take it to the master of the ceremony, and it's the best wine. See, he has this plan. He puts it out, and it comes out as the best, the choice, the top shelf wine. Now, I'm not a wine aficionado, but I do realize that there's some certain things that make wine some better than others, whether it's just the grapes themselves. It could be just really good growing conditions, the soil, but there's always this part of wine that has to do with time. It takes time, so I'm told, to make good wine. But if you look at this picture, he's like, fill the water pots up. When they're full, take the cup to the master of the banquet. There's no time that takes place. There's no time for it. It's immediately the best wine. The best wine that there could be. Now, I'm not a chemist. I took chemistry in high school. I think I took it in college. It didn't really stick with me. I could probably look at a periodic table and point out some of the elements. I can maybe follow the instructions for a lab to make the cool chemical reaction. But there's some chemical things that take place to have water become wine, things that someone needs to be way smarter than me. And so as I was studying, I came across this article, an article by a professor at the Indiana University of Medical School. And he talks about this picture of this something seemingly simple as water becoming something complex as wine. And he says that it's not just that idea of something going from simple to complex, but there needs to be some other things involved. There needs to be flavor and color and texture for the good wine to be sensed by the master. And so the change is more dramatic than just complexity, but it goes into this idea that it's not just rearranging atoms in the water to make wine, but it's actually creating new atoms to make wine. See, the water, even if it was dirty water, because remember these were cleaning pots, ceremonial cleaning pots, that all the chemicals involved in that water, there's not the right compounds to make wine. They need sugars and alcohols and aromatic compounds and colors, and they contain much more carbon and nitrogen than would be present in just water, even dirty water. So new atoms would have had to be formed. So they would have to create new carbon atoms, new nitrogen atoms, new potassium. So it's not just changing the stuff, it's really creating new stuff. Changing it into something that was not that way before. And we see that in one sense, it looks just like creation. And the word there, it's a Latin phrase called creato ex nihilo. Creato ex nihilo means creation out of nothing. Something from nothing, just like God did as he created the universe on the days of creation in Genesis chapter 1. So Jesus is showing in this miracle that he is creating, making something out of nothing, something completely new. So that's the sign, and we see the purpose of the sign, but here's my question. What is our focus of the sign? See, we can ask ourselves two questions. Are we focused on the wine, or are we focused on the wine maker? Are we focused on the wine, or are we focused on the wine maker? Because see, so many people in the story, they miss it. They just focus on this good wine. The focus is misplaced focus on the wine. A lot of people in the story, they only see the wine that's the miracle. Now, Jesus is all about the celebration. He's all about providing. He's all about the actual wine itself. But if we only look at the wine, we're missing what he had for us. So the master of the banquet, the bridegroom, the guests, they're just stoked that they have this choice wine. Right? The master says, you saved the best till last. Yes, Jesus wanted to bless this party with great wine. And so he says, hey, I'm going to give you an abundance of wine. So just look at the quantity of the wine he makes. Right? It says that the pots, there's 6 pots. 120 to 180 gallons of water would have filled the pot. So 120 to 180 gallons of wine. I did some math, and it would be over 900 average bottles of wine, which would be about 4,500 glasses of wine. Now, I don't know how big this party is, but I'm guessing that it's not going to drink 4,500 glasses of wine. So he says, I'm going to give you more than you need. And remember, the wedding's already half over. They've already had the wine that they provided, and they're still saying Jesus is going to bless them with an abundance. The quantity was above and beyond. But it wasn't just the quantity that was important, it was the quality, right? He says, this is the best wine, the choice wine. And you saved the best till now. Jesus cares about the quality of the wine. So when we look at that sign, does our focus just go to the wine? Because the master, the bridegroom, the guests, they were just blessed by the wine itself, and that's all their eyes could see. So what about us? Is our focus just the wine? You know, the drink? So if we're not just focusing on the wine, hopefully we're focusing on the wine maker, right? The correct focus is on the wine maker. And who sees that? We see in verse 11 that what Jesus did here in Cana and Galilee was the first of his signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The disciples saw. The disciples saw the winemaker. They saw that he was revealing himself, and they believed. Now, I also think the servants got to get a good glimpse of what happened, but they knew, but they didn't say anything. So remember, wine is a great sign, but wine is not the destination. The destination needs to be the sign needs to point to the winemaker, which is the destination, is Jesus. Point to Jesus. And the reason for the sign was to what? To reveal his glory. To show us who he was, to begin that process, to know that he is worthy of our honor, our praise, and our worship. That word glory, it encompasses the greatness, the significance, the magnificence, the beauty, the perfection, all that Jesus is. That's what the sign reveals. So the disciples saw that. They saw the sign, but they really saw behind the sign the winemaker. And they put their focus on him. What about us? Are we looking at the way he reveals his glory to us? Are we seeing that, like the disciples did, that we see his glory and we believe in him? See, he's the one who is glory. He came and dwelt among us, and he shows us who he is, right? He came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And the winemaker reveals his glory through the wine. Focus. Focus on the wine or focus on the winemaker. I feel so sad that all those at the party, at the wedding, at the celebration missed Jesus. They only focused on the wine. So look at the winemaker. Look at the quantity and quality of the winemaker. First of all, Jesus' quantity, right? He is more than enough. It's not Jesus plus anything else, it's Jesus. He is enough, and he is a life that is full and abundant. And he wants to give us a life that is full and abundant. I love John 10:10, where it says, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Or in the ESV it says, "Have life and have it abundantly." Quantity is above all. It's going to be again and again, more and more. That's the quantity of the winemaker, but also the quality of the winemaker. Right? He is greater than all. He shows his supremacy. He is supreme. Right? He's presented as greater than all who was and greater than all who will ever to become. That's the quality of Jesus. I like it in Colossians 1, verse 15 says, "The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." Jesus' quality is above all else, exalted to the highest point. So when we see the sign, when we see the wine, it's all pointing to the quality and the quantity of the winemaker. May we focus on Jesus. When we focus on the winemaker, when we focus on the Creator. I think it's very interesting that the book of John, the Gospel of John, was written in a way that John kind of lived and he probably took notes along the way, and he saw the end, and then he went back and he wrote it all down. So he knew what was going to happen at the end. He could look back and say, that's where we got to. I know for my life, I kind of see the same thing. I can look back and see where the winemaker provided, where Jesus provided. And I remember within the first year of my marriage, actually probably the first few months, my wife and I got married. She had just graduated from college, so she didn't have a job yet. Now, bills don't ever really look at the fact that you don't have enough income, because they still keep coming. So I remember sitting there an afternoon, and the stack of bills on the table were there, and I also knew how much money was in the bank account. And I knew that they probably wouldn't line up. Remember opening the first one, and it was the phone bill. It wouldn't have been much. This is back in the days of landlines. But $25 is still $25. And I knew, like I said, what was in the bank account. And I remember opening that up, and instead of being a bill for $25, there's actually a credit for $80. See, 3 months of my bill would have been covered because the Lord provided. In that same time, you still have to eat. Like I said, bills still come. You still want to put food on the table, and money wasn't multiplying in my account. And I got a letter. It's a newsletter. My aunt and uncle are campus missionaries in a college in Colorado. And so they would send their monthly newsletter. Newsletter would talk about praises that they were having and prayer requests. And then it always had the part that was so hard to read because it was the ask for financial support. So that came every month. When this time, it maybe said the little note that my aunt would write, but then there was a check. A check sitting there that just said, just because in the memo line. A check for $100 that I knew would help cover those costs of food. So I look at those to say, man, I could have been really great to look back and look at the phone bill and say, man, look at how great the phone bill is. Look at how good I can hear the person on the other side of the line. It's so crystal clear. Or I could look at the check and say, man, my aunt's penmanship was great. I really like the account it came from, the bank it came, but do we look at the sign? Or do we look at the one who provided? Do we look at the winemaker? Do we look at Jesus? Now, for my wife and I, it started a kind of plan for our lives to know that Jesus could always provide. He would always provide. And he's going to do it in his own creative ways so that we could always rely on that to take place, to put our faith and put our hope in him and not the sign. We believe more and more in the winemaker, so what about us? What about us today? Are we focused on the wine or are we focused on the winemaker? Where is our focus? Would we ask ourselves one of the two phrases, one of the two questions? One, I want some wine, the drink, or do I want the winemaker, Jesus? Which one is it going to be? Which one for us would we focus on? What is our focus as we leave here today? And maybe you're here and you've never made that focus on the winemaker. I would hate to go another step without reminding us that we can so easily just put our faith in him. To, first of all, confess our life that doesn't add up, to confess our sin, and to want to repent, to turn from that, but to believe in him. To accept him, to run to the winemaker, the highest quality, the highest quantity. And once we do that, to live for him. After the service, the prayer time will be here. And if you're in that spot where you haven't put your focus on Jesus, would you come and talk to someone about that? Would you maybe talk to the person who came with? Maybe would you give that chance to say, I want the winemaker, not just the wine. But here's the coolest thing. When we actually focus on the winemaker, he is the new wine. He is the new wine. But our focus has to be on him first. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much that you gave us your son of highest quality, and you gave us all of him. God, would we look to him? Would we have our focus on him, on the winemaker, and not on the sign of the wine? God, we thank you that you are greater than anything and anything we will go through. We ask that you would help us through the struggles of our lives. Would you let us see more and more of you in the way you provide for us? God, we praise you and we thank you in your holy name. Amen.